So that movie, the movie I was talking about was it's called the the Motorcycle Diaries, right?
Yeah.
And so we had to watch that in my history class. I don't know if it was uh, part of the course or not, right? But this is somebody that like I guess my history teacher was really interested in or whatnot, right? And
Yeah.
the movie is supposed to depict like uh, Che Guevara in his earlier days, right? And so Che Guevara, from what I remember about the movie, he starts out as like a doctor. He started out as a doctor. He's from Argentina, right?
Hmm.
And he goes on this road trip throughout South America. And interestingly enough, I had some friends who I was with in high school, and they took like the same road trip, or they took the same path that this guy took from like Argentina all throughout like South America, going up to, I guess, you know, I don't know where, but it was still in like South America. And, you know, there seemed to be this, what do you call it? Like he was an emblematic figure,
Hmm.
people like you wanted to be like him, or, he was inspirational because he had this, very free spirited, almost like, rebellious nature, right?
Yeah.
And of course, eventually he became a rebel, right? But I say that to say, you know, I guess my question is, what is it about, revolutionaries and rebels that made our generation want to be like them so much, given the fact that we know what what took place once a lot of those figures like Che Guevara, Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, and others come into power. Why do you think we were? Why do you think our generation, was so enamored by those people?
You know it. It kind of, it seems to me that our generation has a very deep sense of justice. A very, very, very deep seated sense of justice, and I think that every revolutionary who's ever existed, Mao,
Mhm.
Che, the Castros, even we can throw Hitler and Mussolini in that category, and Stalin and Lenin and all these other people.
Right.
You know, they're they're using they're pointing out that injustice exists
Mhm.
and that injustice is happening around us,
Mhm.
and they're making a pitch that it's only through revolution that we can eliminate the injustice. It's sort of like it's sort of like those. It kind of makes me think of those big Apple conventions
Mhm.
where it'll just be like a big black background, and it'll be some person trying to look like Steve Jobs wearing like a turtleneck sweater or something, and
Right.
they'll parade out this brand new uh, you know um tablet or phone or something, and they're offering it for like $500 more than what the same equivalent one would be, just like made by Samsung or something.
Right.
But it's like when you try to act as if there's only one option, like those Apple conventions, their whole sales pitch is, this is it. We
Mhm.
have the iPad. There's
Mhm.
nothing like it. This is the only thing.
Mhm.
That's not true. You
Right.
know,
Right.
now Apple is unique aesthetically, and
Right.
there are some things in the background that make Apple very different, but I mean,
Mhm.
for all intents and purposes, it's really a very, I mean, there, you're really splitting hairs to identify the main differences between Apple and the equivalent products.
Right.
And I guess my point is that you have to try to pretend that there are no other options, that there's either Apple
Mhm.
or nothing.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what the revolutionaries say. The revolutionaries say there's either revolution or nothing.
Right.
And in opting to not revolt, you are opting in you're acting in favor of the injustice.
Yeah. That's something that, let's talk about that, because there's this idea that if you don't join in on the revolution, right, or you don't join in on the rebellion, or whatever, then you're opting in for injustice, right? You're opting in for um what do they say? There's like, to do nothing is to be part of the problem, or something like that. You know what I mean? If you say you're not going to
Hmm.
join, you're part of
Oh,
the issue.
that evil flourishes when good men do nothing, or
Yeah, just it's like
silence is
you're
the language of cowards. I
right.
think is another.
Yes, yeah, and so you can't, because and I feel like in a lot of ways that's how it was, coming up through high school and college. Like, if you decided not to join the crowd, I suppose,
Mhm.
you were you were also gonna get scapegoated. You know what I mean? Uh, if you decided not to join the victims, right, you were gonna get scapegoated. But here's to take this back to the biographies of a lot of these people, right? I don't know if people understand this. A lot of these guys were actually part of well-to-do families. They
Like
were,
Che.
yes, right. Um, and Mao, right? I mean, Mao came from a landholding family. He came from a farming family, but they had, a big estate or whatever. You know what I mean? And they had a lot of land. You know, in other words, people like Lenin, you know, Mao, you know,
And
they
Marx
had
is a perfect example.
right in Marx, right? They had a disdain for the bourgeoisie, right? Um, but they were a part of the elite, right? Who were disenchanted, I suppose, with the elite, or just wanted to be the rebel child. They want they wanted to make a change or make a difference, um, at the expense of people who were really, I think, you know, who were really dealing with economic and social issues, right? The peasantry, who, most of them were illiterate, right? They didn't have any real forms of education. And I think that a lot of these so-called intellectuals took advantage of that, right?
Yeah.
They took advantage of the what do they call it in Marxism? The proletariat, or
Yes.
something like this. I'm not a Marxist, so I don't spend all my time trying to figure out the names of these cats. But the point is that I think there was a manipulation tactic, right, in the sense that people who were educated, they may not have been a part of the part of the bourgeoisie or part of the aristocracy, but they were educated men, right? And they had an understanding of, well, they had education, right? And so I think that had a big part to play in how they were able to uh, sort of get people to follow them, right, and get
Mm.
people to back them, is because they knew that the lower classes, were not really, didn't really understand what was going on politically at the time, right? I mean, would you say that? I mean, I don't, you know,
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I don't really think the lower classes really cared all that much.
yeah,
Because the thing is, when you're the one that's actually when you're the one that's on the receiving end of the injustice, like you're a family that doesn't own any land, or you're in poverty or something. That's just a way of it's just a way of life for you. It's not this, crusading against injustice. It doesn't. You don't have the luxury of being a social justice warrior when you're actually living in social injustice.
Right.
It's
Right.
only the privileged class that have the luxury of being social justice warriors.
Right.
And the problem is that they turn they turn the victims of the injustice into ideas. They abstract them, and what they do, they strip them of their humanity and dignity.
Mm.
And they turn them into an object, into like a
Mm.
justification.
Yes.
And they use that as the justification for their crusade.
Right.
Like I can tell you this, like, kind of circling back to Che.
Yeah.
He became the equivalent of a commissar in Cuba.
Okay.
I have two what would they be? I think two great uncles in Cuba,
Mhm.
which my family's long lost touch with our family in Cuba.
Okay.
But two great uncles that we know for a fact were sent to the concentration camps operated by Castro and by Che,
Mhm.
and were butchered there.
Wow.
And I can tell you this: my family in Cuba, which I don't know a whole lot about them. I
Yeah.
know some details. They weren't wealthy
Right.
and they weren't influential.
Right.
They
Right.
just held the wrong ideas,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying any of this to try to garner any sympathy or anything. They're, what happened to them happened, and now they're hopefully with the Lord.
Yes.
But the fact is that the crusade against injustice, down the road, once the revolution actually happens, and then they actually have to solidify power, regiment society, and everything.
Mhm.
The only way for them to maintain power is to commit injustice.
Yes.
And that's a common trait among all these people.
That's a common trait, man. Because I mean, anywhere,
It's like
anywhere
two
you.
phases.
Yes. Right.
You know,
And a lot, and then here's the thing, man. See, because a lot of my, you know, I'm not naming no names. We ain't gonna be calling people out, but I'm just saying.
no,
You know, some of my professors, they had the same mentality. They would say, um, well, you know, uh, Lenin skipped over one of the stages of communism, right?
hmm
Um, in order to get to the stage of communism, like he skipped over
hmm
like socialism to get to communism or something like that, And I guess that's a way of like trying to say, well, communism in its truest form hasn't really been lived out, right? We haven't really had communism, uh, you know, yet, because those people, yes, they didn't necessarily, you know, um, get it right or something like that. But you know, my thing is okay. Well, then why can we say the same things about every single country that has adopted, you know, um, Marxism? Why is it always the same result,
yeah,
right? Um, you know, and this is all throughout the different, whatever country. You can say Cuba, you can say, um, Russia.
not Nazi Germany and Nazi and Italy, and
Right,
Italy to a lesser degree under
right,
the control of Mussolini.
right, 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 and even with Cambodia, under Pol Pot.
And the
uh,
French Revolution, the reign of terror.
right, French Revolution, the Ethiopian uprising in the 1970s with the assassination of the Emperor Haile Selassie, and the introduction of the Derg. right? So, North Korea, right? You could name many, right? But the question is why is it always the same result? It always leads to eventually like mass murder, right?
Hmm.
Tyranny, dictatorship, right? By people that by people that have a certain level of you know in today's terminology we would say who have a certain level of wokeness.
Yeah.
They are they are they are they are you know they are woke, right? But for me, man, I think that the reason why a lot of those people have been and Marxism has been and revolutions or revolutionaries and rebels have been sort of uh, immortalized as some sort of exemplary figures is because well, one, it's a lack of understanding history, right? Not really reading about these people,
Hmm.
and it's more so like the cult of personality, right?
Hmm.
Which you know they would say Stalin had or Mao, had, right? And and then when you look at Che, right, he's got, he, when I don't know if this happened in Florida, but like here in Washington, Seattle, there were a lot of people that would, wear T-shirts with his face on it and stuff like that, you know, and I don't think they really understood, um, who he was, right, and the
Well,
things that they did.
the main issue with doing that in somewhere like Florida, where there are so many Cubans,
Right,
is if you were to do that,
right,
that's a very easy way to get punched. Like, I'm not advocating for that, but I'm just saying, like, that would be the equivalent of, the amount of outrage and scandal that would create. It would be equivalent to wearing to wearing a a Mao shirt in like a in among a group of like Taiwanese people,
right,
or,
or
or something.
a white sheik amongst a group of black people.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Well, man, exactly, because the
yeah,
thing is, it's something There's a lot of there was a lot of evil committed in that, in the name of Che and by
mhm,
Che
mhm,
toward Cubans.
right,
And the Cubans that are here in Florida, they're the ones that were lucky enough to get out.
right, right,
There are still millions of Cubans that are trapped on the island, that are stuck in this revolutionary society.
right, right. And the other thing that I noticed is that that might tie into this is that wherever you see these revolutions popping up, um, whether you talk about the French Revolution, and which I honestly think is the seed of all of this. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't, that some historians might correct me on that, but I definitely think the French Revolution had a lot to do with how um, how influential the idea of revolution became throughout the world, right? Like the United States has its um, part, right? I think in as far as revolution and influence and stuff like that, but I think that one's different, right? And the reason why I say that is because the French Revolution sought to throw off everything in terms of culture, including the most important part, which is the religious, right? It sought to uproot, you know, um, its Christian consciousness, right? Wanted to start it, they wanted to start the date with some other date. The beginning of the revolution was the beginning of the year. The beginning of time, right? You know, they of course wanted to uproot Catholicism, from France. So a lot of people think it was just about overthrowing the king, but you know what happens in a lot of these places is that they uproot the whole they try to uproot the whole structure,
Oh
the
yeah.
whole foundation. you know so you know and then you see what that does to those countries. You know what I mean? There's almost this like detachment, or like a generation of ignorance, you know what I mean, or something like that, because the generations that come after don't have that same um, don't have that same attachment to you know their religious identity, their cultural identity, and things like that. I mean, uh, what's your take on that?
Well, it seems like so I guess I would put I'd say that you've got kind of like two categories. I'd say you've got revolutionaries, and
Mhm.
then you've got restorationists.
Okay.
You know,
Right.
and restorationist is somebody that would seek to restore order or restore balance or something. Now,
Right.
a so I'd equate a revolution or like a revolutionary in the in the modern sense of the term, and using all the examples we've looked at, like Marx and Che and all these, and Lenin and all these other people, is they're almost like they're like a cultural alien invasion.
Mm,
You know,
mm, mm.
they're trying to impose these ideas that are not based upon the dignity of the human person, that are not based upon human relationships. They're not based upon just upon the sacredness of human life. They're usually, not always, but they're usually based upon upon like material well-being of the society as a whole.
Right.
Like Marx will argue that the only way to materially progress, like to basically accumulate more stuff, build
Mhm.
more factories, and have larger agricultural yields,
Mhm.
it's to move beyond capitalism into communism,
Right.
which history as our teacher has shown that is it's not the case.
Right.
When communism comes into somewhere, people starve. There's not an abundance of food. but
Right.
but a revolutionary, they want to decapitate and abolish the tradition that governed the society, that usually was maybe not perfect, but based upon human relationships, and was based around the dignity of human life.
Right.
Again, not perfect, but you could look at pre-revolutionary France, pre-revolutionary Cuba, pre-revolutionary Russia,
Mhm.
pre-revolutionary Italy and Germany,
Mhm.
which the Germans were always in revolution, but that's a that's a side note, I guess. But
Yeah.
the thing is that they had societies that were not perfect, but they
Mhm.
had societies that were based around, that had some structure in them,
Mhm.
that that gave people guardrails as they progressed through life.
Right.
You know,
Right.
um, like the types of guardrails rails I'd be talking about is if you came from a family of sculptors, then your natural trajectory would be to become a sculptor. You would spend your life learning the family trade, and really you're going out and trying to figure out what you're going to do with your life. That's something that you really wouldn't have to worry too much about. Now,
Right.
somebody could argue, it's far better for someone to be able to go out and choose what they want to do for a living, carve out their own life. And I think
Mhm.
that's a conversation to be had. I think
Yeah.
that you've got extremes here, but again, it's not perfect. But what the revolutionaries would say is, well, we gotta throw it all away.
Mhm.
The revolutionary would say, this is an imperfect system, and since it's imperfect, we gotta throw the whole thing out. We gotta incinerate it. We gotta
Right.
destroy it. We gotta root every little bit out. But somebody who is a restorationist, which would I would argue, if someone's a restorationist, they would have to come to it from some kind of a Christian tradition,
Right.
or well, a Judeo-Christian tradition, because we have the garden, you
Right.
know, that we understand that the world was created perfect, and then it fell into disorder,
Yeah, okay.
and
Yes.
what our goal is to restore order, you
Right.
know.
Right.
But a revolutionary, and we're trying to restore it, we're trying to restore order back to what we know perfection to be manifested in like morals,
Hmm.
and traditionally what Christian tradition would call like the natural law,
Right.
which is where we get property rights and all kinds of other things from.
Right. Right.
But a revolutionary would say, no, 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 no. We have to throw all that away,
Hmm.
and they have a very, very narrow, a very fundamentalist, very, very narrow set of ideas that they cling to, and
Hmm.
they want to impose that into reality. And if they have to, and if they have to kill some people to do it, then they're willing to do it. Well, what was the I think the founder of the Weather Underground said you got to crack a few eggs to start a revolution, or
Yeah,
something.
I
You know,
remember that. Yeah.
I think that's quintessentially revolutionary.
Right.
But someone who is a restorationist, they're going to be confined by morals. They're going
Right.
to be confined by what their sense of good is.
Right.
You know,
Right.
their sense of success is going to be, how are people treating one another.
Right. And yeah. And so, I mean, what would you say about the way that a lot of the, I guess, revolutionaries today, or people that call themselves, okay, would you even put people who call themselves woke into that same category, or can we not? I mean, do we make a distinction about?
You know, the thing, I think it's unfair with most people to, because we're all, as humans, we're all so inconsistent
Mm,
with everything,
mm,
and I have a lot of friends that are, they're what you call woke, and I know you do too, and I think they're people that, whether they believe in God or not,
mm.
I think they are people that God instilled with a very, very strong sense of justice,
Right. Right.
and unfortunately, I think that sense of justice that they have, I think it's been perverted. But
Mm,
you and I, as restorationists, what we would love to see is for them to be restored to what God intends for them to be,
right.
and what a blessing they would be, to not just to themselves, but and to us, but to the rest of the world.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a that's an interesting point. Um, I guess for so, like, with me, I've been around so many different thoughts of view, like politically, that it's sometimes it's hard to even tell what people, really really believe anymore, right? Because it's all kind of mashed up, right? Like, so they don't they have a sort of socialist Marxist view when it comes to politics. Um, you know, instead of Christianity, they want to choose, like, you know like Hindu, like, I don't want to say Hindu, but what's the right word to use? Uh, they want to be like polytheists, or they want to have some form of religion that incorporates
Mhm.
the female aspect of a deity. Um,
Yeah.
so with that might be something like you know voodoo, or candomblé, or santeria, or uh, you know um, or they choose the path of Buddhism and and mindfulness and meditation, right? Things like this, right? Um, and for the most part, I think that is maybe that's something that will sort of lead them back to back to Christianity. Like, okay, maybe you have to have a few stumbling blocks, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you have to go through a couple of things as a nation as a whole, or whatever, as a community, in order to realize that we didn't make the right choice, right? And I think this can be said for a lot of the nations that chose to, or were swept up by Marxism, and communism, that maybe you know um, they had to experience that. I don't want to say that, man, because it's like they had to experience. I want to say, because it's like a lot of lives were lost, right? So you don't want to say they had to. I think maybe that sense of freedom that God has given us allows for us to make mistakes, right? And but those mistakes can be you know can be corrected, right? And that's the thing about it. It's like, I think when you talk about restoration, right? Well, restoration also involves like forgiveness, right? And humility, right? Like, and I think that's God, right? It allows us to like make mistakes, but He won't turn away from us. He won't say like, you know, you must be executed because you didn't do this thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or because you chose to turn away from me, right? And so that, for me, I think that's the important part, is that you know uh, we can always restore our relationship with God. Something you rarely found in under communism, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember in one of my history classes, this was Russian history, and
Oh boy.
yeah, and uh, my professor, he said, well, we had learned about the 5-year plan. I believe it was called the 5-year plan under
Hmm.
Stalin, right? And he said, uh, when that plan failed, um, you know, in order to find a reason for why that plan failed, uh, Stalin um, liquidated, right? That's the term he used, liquidated uh, people,
Hmm.
right? And you know, it's like this thing where, well, there's not something wrong with me, right? There's
Right.
something wrong with the the people under me, right? And you know, uh, regular people who, like, okay, well, you don't have a job, you're just rolling around in the street. Okay, you're gonna get liquidated, right? Oh, you're an orphan. Okay, you're gonna get liquidated, right? Um, you know, things like that. It's so, and here's another thing. I think that with Marxism, what happens is that um, I think instead of recognizing God as the highest authority, um, you know, these individuals, excuse me, they became gods unto themselves, right?
Hmm.
And so they were, and you see what happens with that, right? The
Well,
pride,
they view themselves as being divine because
right,
they hold the correct ideas
right,
in their mind. I mean,
right,
you and I both know that they held, and the people like them hold wrong ideas,
yeah,
but to themselves they believe that they're holding correct ideas, and that entitles them to commit any atrocity, and it doesn't matter because they view themselves as being perfected by holding the correct ideas,
right,
you know.
right, right, right. Well, hey man,
In fact, I'd like to say something to you about Che.
yeah,
Um, he he in Cuba, you know, the Castros welcomed him in with open arms.
yes, yes,
And Che loved massacring people that uh people that he viewed as being sticks in the mud in the revolution, or as
right,
just being undesirable people. He loved killing them. In fact, they had built this massive sugar it was like massive sugar plantations in the middle of the island, and they had
hmm
put concentration camps there, and I forget what it was called.
hmm
But um but Che had an office on the second floor there, and he had a wall knocked. He knocked one of the walls out of his office so that
hmm
he could personally have a view of the firing line, because he loved watching people that weren't people that did not go along with the revolution, or people who just held incorrect ideas. Like if you remained religious,
right,
and the revolution told you to embrace atheism, then
hmm
you'd be a prime candidate to be murdered in the firing squads. And
right,
Che loved watching the people who disagreed with him getting shot.
right,
And so Che eventually, the Castros told him, oh, Che, you're so great, you're so great.
hmm
So they said, you know what, you're so great, and you hold such correct, orthodox Marxist ideas and stuff. They said, we're going to put you in charge of the agriculture department of Cuba. So
right,
we're going to put you in charge of the sugar canes, of the sugar cane fields. We're going to put you in charge of like policy involving like tractors and stuff like that, and we're even going to put you in charge of the oil refineries and stuff. Che became very powerful
yeah,
in Cuba for a very short time.
hmm
And Che, in spite of him holding all the correct Marxist ideas, he imported the wrong kinds of tractors from the Soviet Union that
hmm
actually tore up the Cuban soil.
hmm
So there were a couple of years where Cuba was not able to really export much in the way of sugarcane, which Cuba is an island built on exporting sugarcane.
right,
That is their thing.
right,
And then to top it all off, Che, in spite of holding all the correct Marxist ideas, he imported the wrong kind of fuel from the Soviet Union, the wrong kind of oil, ran
hmm
it through the refineries in Cuba, and it corroded and destroyed the refineries because the oil contained too much sulfur and a few other impurities,
yeah,
more than the Cuban oil refineries could stand. And
wow,
Che created a disaster.
right,
So the Castros took him aside and very quietly said, Che, you got to get the hell out of here.
right, right,
So they sent him on his way.
right. I
Um,
think yeah, he
yeah.
died in like where did he die? Mexico or something like that. I think he
I think it was South America.
yeah, somewhere in
In
South
fact,
America.
here, I'll get to that in just a second. But the Plaza de Revolucion in Havana, it's got a massive mural of Che Guevara in it,
Yeah,
and the Castros to this day, deify Che Guevara as being a saint,
right.
and they just don't talk about all the disaster that Che brought
Did
with him to Cuba.
do
But
they not is it because most people don't know that he was the one that was
well,
the cause of that agricultural destruction or
I think if you talk to a lot of Cubans, they know. But the problem is, if you say that too loudly in Cuba, then you may end up disappearing, and nobody may ever hear from you again. Because because
in the right now in the 21st century?
Cuba still has a very extensive secret police program.
Oh my God.
Um, and so Che, but remember that if you're a fundamentalist Marxist, the missteps the missteps and mismanagement that Che took in destroying the sugarcane crop,
Mhm.
in royally screwing up the oil refineries and stuff, and the whole debacle with the tractors and the land, the soil and everything.
Mhm.
You're not going to hold that against him, because remember, he held the correct orthodox Marxist ideas according to the Communist Party of Cuba.
Right.
So
Right.
according to them, he's sinless. He committed no sins. But This is a complete side note. I am personally completely opposed to the United States government committing political assassinations.
Right.
I do not like our CIA. I don't like our intelligence agencies going out
Right.
and bombing anybody, droning them, sniping them, whatever. I think that's, as somebody who's a very proud American and loves the United States,
Yeah.
to me that's an embarrassment. You know,
Right. Right.
the only time where the CIA has ever carried out a political assassination, the only one that I'm not completely opposed to was when che Guevara was in South America in one of the jungles. I think it was the early 70s or the late 60s,
Mhm.
and some CIA assassin gunned him down like a dog in the jungle. Shannon, I'll be
That's
honest with you.
funny.
This is something that's probably motivated by hatred and stuff, but
Yeah, you gotta go to
the thing
confession
is,
for that, bro.
yeah, the thing, all I can say is I'm proud to be an American. That is one instance where our intelligence agencies, carrying out a political assassination, I'm not all that opposed to it. But generally speaking, I'm completely opposed to all that stuff.
Right.
But Che getting gunned down like a dog in the jungle, fine.
That's the only way That's funny.
And I mentioned earlier that people are inconsistent, and yeah,
Yeah.
guilty.
All right. Well, we'll close out on that note, bro. But we're gonna return to this, and hopefully it'll lead into some more interesting topics. But
Yes.
we'll keep this going. So yeah, man. Good talking to you, bro.
Oh, you too, Shannon, and we'll have to talk about Mao next. I'd
Yeah.
love for us to have a conversation about Mao specifically.
Yeah. You specifically about that missing top of his
Exactly.
hair.
Yeah.
All right, man. Good to talk to you, bro.
All right, you too, brother.
All right.